Yo, what's going on, guys? It is Fox98 here, and welcome back to a brand new episode of the F1 debate for you guys today here on the channel. Today, we're going to be debating about the British Grand Prix that happened a week ago as of when you're watching this video. So if you end up enjoying it, drop it a like, subscribe to the channel if you're new around here as well, and let's get straight into it. Or should I say, the F1 2023 Front Wing Upgrade Grand Prix. Because heading into the British Grand Prix, there was so many brand new front wings up to offer. We saw a brand new front wing from Aston Martin. We saw one from McLaren, which was only on Lando Norris's car, but we still saw one. We saw one from Alpine, and we also saw one from Mercedes. So 4 different teams, nearly half the grid, bringing in brand new front wings for us to take a divey little look at. But, of course, that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about the British Grand Prix, so let's get straight into it. In the practice sessions, it was really fascinating, actually. We saw, obviously, Williams was the team that just shone throughout practice. And I'm going to be one of those people, because I was one of those people, that was saying, it's only practice, who cares? Well, boy, was I wrong, because they were really in it. And even in FP3, when Williams was smashing it on the timing sheets, I was a bit like, oh my god, how have they done this? Genuinely, I mean it. And I get, look, the track characteristics suits the Williams. It has literally 0 downforce and 0 drag. So what do you get? A quick car in a straight line. But of course, Silverstone's still got a lot of corners, albeit multiple of them are high-speed corners. So it really played into their strengths, and they were really, really quick. And what solidified this, and no disrespect to him, was the fact that Logan Sargent was quick too. Now, don't get me wrong, Alex Albon is a rapid driver. We've seen that. And of course, with the upgrades that he got in the Canadian Grand Prix, which Sargent only would have actually had at the British Grand Prix, it kind of just showed that actually, whatever direction Williams is going in is getting there. It's definitely not, like, revolutionary. It's not going to change their fortune for the rest of the season now. Because, of course, in the slow speed corners, granted, Silverstone doesn't have that many, but in the ones it did have, they were not up there in terms of pace compared to the rest. And it's clear to see that in the high-speed corners slash low downforce circuits, Williams will definitely shine, and it's their strength, and they played into it absolutely beautifully. It nearly actually didn't pay off for them. In qualifying, we saw yet another wet qualifying session, and I'm pretty sure now that's the 3rd race in a row where we've had a wet going into a dry qualifying session. Because the Canadian Grand Prix was, I'm pretty confident, was a wet quali session, wasn't it not? Unless I'm being really stupid at this point. I'm sure that was a wet quali session. Granted, the Austrian Grand Prix was a dry session, but the sprint quali was a wet to dry session. And then Silverstone was a wet to dry session. So, I don't know, it's almost like the FIA just going, when's it going to rain? Not for the race, stop the race, for qualifying. And I mean, it is actually quite entertaining. It's very nerve-wracking, though. Especially if you've got, like, a favourite driver or a favourite team. And when I say that, if you're an ultra of that driver or team, and you're literally there biting your nails as the likes of, well, Sergio Perez gets knocked out in Q1. We straight up kind of need to have some low-key conversations about Sergio Perez. This is the 5th race in a row now that he has not made it through into Q3 even. And to get knocked out in Q1 at the British Grand Prix. Now, I completely understand it. Look, you know, drivers are out there and the track is wet, the track is improving. And of course, the disadvantage that Sergio Perez had is that he was already in trouble. Like, the fact is, I get it. Look, if you're the last man to cross the line, you've got the best of the track because you've got 20 of the drivers, you know, roaming around and giving you that opportunity to warm up the track, get a bit of the dampness off of there. So for Sergio Perez, yeah, he had the worst of the track conditions, I get that. But he couldn't get the laps in the first place to warrant himself going out last in the final part of qualifying. Of course, yeah, sure, Red Bull could have done that, absolutely. You know, you could be saying to, you know, as a diehard Perez fan, well, hang on a minute, Red Bull sent him out the front of the queue. Why are they doing that? Well, the fact is that Perez doesn't have a lap on the board that's significantly good. So, of course, at that point, you've got to get out there first because you've got to get a lap on the board. And, of course, yeah, you know, all the other drivers were improving and improving. But it's not as if, like, it wasn't as if, like, all of the drivers were, you know, struggling on their own. Like, the drivers that were, like, directly behind Perez, and they weren't, you know, I think it was one of the Williams cars, like Lando Norris, maybe not Norris, actually, maybe Piastri, I think it was. Those type of cars, they're only just behind, so Yeah, of course, they've got a little bit of a better track surface because Perez has gone through that section and maybe cleared off a tiny bit of water if there was any. But the fact is that Perez is in one of the most dominant, well, for arguably, the most dominant Formula 1 car that you'll see for decades and decades to come. That Red Bull has taken pole position in every single Grand Prix apart from the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. We've had 10 races now, and I had to double check that, this season. Red Bull have won every single race this season. They've won 11 consecutive Formula 1 races, only ever equalled to the McLaren of 1988. And if they win the Hungarian Grand Prix, they will set the record in Formula 1 for the most consecutive wins in the sport. And he can't get into Q3. And it baffles me because his race performances have warranted some of it, but not all of it. And that's the scary thing, is that it is some and not all. Now, let's go backwards in time, all right? And let's sort of wiggle our way through all these issues, starting with the Spanish Grand Prix. That's just a legitimate pace. There was nothing to do with that. And then in the race itself, he had good pace, but he wasn't good enough to beat the Mercedes-Benz duo in the end. And that was, of course, lights out for him. Monaco, granted, look, in Monaco, if you're going to crash, right, you're going to crash in Q3. You've already set a lap. It's the second flying lap. You're going for it. You are on the limit. And you've got to push a little bit harder. And you've gone into the wall. I completely understand that. That's fair enough. But this is Q1. Like, you don't even need to go that, hell to the leather. It's Q1. Just get a lap on the board and get through. That's all you've got to do in qualifyings 1 and even 2, to be honest, in that matter. And he bins it into a wall. So, of course, his race is fully compromised. He's getting lapped by Max Verstappen. He's crashing into Stroll about 7 times. He crashed, I'm pretty sure, into Gasly about 6 times. Bumped the wall himself. Broke his front wing about 4 times. It was an absolute shocker. Then in Canada, I can't remember. Oh, yeah, he didn't get a lap on the board in Q2. And he wasn't even near getting a lap on the board to get himself through. Verstappen was like 2 and a bit seconds quicker than Sergio Perez. Then when it came to the time when people were using the dry tyres, he couldn't do it because obviously, it was too wet at that point. But even then, same with Charles Leclerc on that occasion, and Lewis Hamilton. Hamilton was P10, Leclerc P11, and Perez P12. And at that circumstance, Hamilton was on the inters, so too was Leclerc and Perez. So legitimately, in a qualifying session, Lewis Hamilton in the Mercedes was able to be quicker than Sergio Perez on the same tyre in the same condition, pretty much. So that begs the question, well, what are you doing in that session? Heading into Austria, he had 3 lap times deleted for track limits. How can you not stay on the road? All right, take a step back a second, because I've never driven a Formula 1 car and I'd probably stole it trying to get out the garage and do what Verstappen did and break the front wing trying to turn out the garage. But seriously, you've got the white line's there. If you get your lap time deleted the once, that's absolutely fair enough. It can happen. It does, when you're pushing the limit. That's when your second lap, then you just go a little bit cautious into that corner, gets it deleted for a second time. Now you're thinking, hang on a second, you've done it once, you've done it again. Come on now, just get a lap on the board and just get yourself through. Like, seriously. And he does it again. 3 lap times getting deleted. And then here in qualifying in Silverstone, he couldn't even get enough to get through into Q2. For me personally, I really like Sergio Perez. I think he's a great guy, great driver. His defensive capabilities in particular are outstanding. I look back to some of those races in 2021, for example, the Turkish Grand Prix against Lewis Hamilton, and also the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix in 2021 against Hamilton. He puts up some brilliant defensive performances. His wheel-to-wheel combat is amazing. It is to the limit of aggressive without going over it. But the guy's under massive pressure, and it's hard for me to say it, but I know how Red Bull work. Look at Nick De Vries. I obviously made the video on my thoughts of him getting sacked. I genuinely don't think Perez will be in that Red Bull car next year. I can't see it. I mean, sure, I get it. He's got a contract until 2025, so of course he is contracted at Red Bull for next season. But I just don't think he will be. I just can't see him staying there. I really don't. Who would Red Bull bring in? Well, it depends on obviously Daniel Ricciardo and how he gets along in the AlphaTauri. And of course, I've seen that they have been looking at the likes of Lando Norris and also Charles Leclerc. So the two of them have been on their radars. But It's hard to say it, but I just can't see him there. But the rest of qualifying, though, was thoroughly entertaining. Again, like I said, the wet, dry conditions, and it was so close. So close for a pole position for Lando Norris. And I'm repping the team. I'm repping the shirt of the team that I support, but I was on my feet when Lando Norris crossed the line. And then I was back down on my chair going, swearing when Max Verstappen crossed the line and went onto pole position. Because come on, we would have loved to seen a British driver on pole position at the British Grand Prix, even though the last time we had it was literally 2021, like 2 years ago. But still, we wanted to see it and we were not given it, which was an absolute shame. But let's talk about McLaren. Are they back? Yes, 100%. McLaren are back in the game now. They've put 2 sets of upgrades now on this car and have really shot through the table, you know. And of course, in this weekend, they jumped clear of AlphaTauri. They were quick in Austria. They were arguably quicker than they were definitely quicker than Aston Martin in Austria. I'd probably say they were level with Mercedes in Austria. Now I know that Lando Norris comfortably beat Hamilton and also Russell in the end. But, of course, Hamilton was in front of Norris for a lot of the race. Of course, I know he made that mistake. Norris got through. But I think the 2 things that gave Norris the upper hand in Austria was, I mean, A, he didn't exceed track limits. So, GG's to that. I think he did anyway. But anyway, look, the track limit saga didn't exactly hurt him too much. I think Hamilton just didn't quite have the setup in the right window. And he was also really frustrated over the race because A, the setup wasn't really working to his liking. And with him getting the track exceeding penalties first and then having Toto on the radio and then trying to talk about other penalties and then Norris going off. You know, he just lost his head at that point. And Norris was a bit more collected because the car was obviously balanced, which, helped him. And, of course, he wasn't getting the track limit penalties. But yet Hamilton was still sort of in that range. So I'd probably say they were slightly level. I'll put McLaren a tiny bit forwards, just, for the sake of he finished in front. But then in Silverstone, they were a force to be reckoned with. And I'm talking a proper force. Like, they were so quick. It was their high-speed cornering that was incredible. The balance on that car is insane. Of course, all they really need to do now is just cut away some of that drag. And they're right in the fight with Red Bull. I mean, granted, Norris getting the better start off the line was a really key factor for him. But even when Verstappen managed to pass him for quite a few consecutive laps, Lando Norris was keeping up with Max Verstappen. And can I give a shout out to Oscar Piastri? I'm gutted for him that he didn't get his first ever podium in Formula 1. The kid deserved it. He was outstanding in this British Grand Prix weekend, qualifying in 3rd place, nearly getting the jump on Verstappen after his awful start. But what impressed me the most, and what was amazing, is that Verstappen and Norris were within a second of each other. They were blasting clear of the Ferraris, who had no pace whatsoever, and Oscar Piastri was in the DRS of Lando Norris and was even asking for team orders. That's how competitive and quick he was. So, and the fact is he didn't put a foot wrong, and he was quicker than the Mercedes, he was quicker than the Ferraris, he was quicker than the Astons, and the crucial factor and why I'm giving him so much more praise is, yes, of course he had the upgrades on the car, but also remember, he didn't even have all of the upgrades on his car. He only had the Austria package. Lando Norris had the up-to-date Silverstone package, which included the front nose and the front wing. Oscar had the old nose and the old wing. So to be able to keep up with Verstappen and Norris with an old spec car just goes to even highlight further the performances that Oscar Piastri did on that race weekend. And with the battle for second in the championship so tight, now clearly between Mercedes, Aston Martin, Ferrari and McLaren, being able, we saw it in qualifying. The gap between Norris and Hamilton, who was 2nd and 7th respectively, was 0.2 of a second. And that's nothing in our sport. Well, it is. It's 0.2 of a second. But you know what I mean? It's extremely close. So if Piastri was, we'd arguably say 0.2 slower than Norris, then he'd be back behind the Ferraris and the Mercedeses. And that's a key thing. Piastri's got some great speed. And do I think McLaren are really back in the game? 100%. I said it in the F1 debate video for the Austrian Grand Prix. if McLaren got their car right in Silverstone, they're way back in the game. They've still got some work to do in the slow speed corners. It depends on their setup though. They might have set their car up differently, but in the slow speed corners, McLaren weren't quite that quick. In fact, it was Red Bull that were the fastest. It was a graphic I saw actually. It was Red Bull were the fastest in the slow speed corners. Mercedes were basically on top of them, Red Bull in the slow speed corners. In the high speed corners, it was actually McLaren that was the fastest, and then I think it was Red Bull and then Ferrari, with Mercedes and Aston close, but hitting up the rear of that duo. Of course, we know for Mercedes and their sake, they've got an awful rear end. And we're going to move on to them in just a second, but to finalise on McLaren, 100% they're back in the game. Can they claim second in the Constructors' Championship? They are 150 points back. But there's 11 races, 12, there's 12, 13. How many races are there in this? I think there's like 13 races still to go. So, yeah, 100% McLaren can get back into this championship by all means. You know, if they've ended up 150 points back after basically halfway through the season, why can't they do that in this? Why can't they overturn that in the second half of the season? It's not impossible, and it depends, because the key thing is if McLaren have a good weekend, and Mercedes, for example, who is second in the championship, have an off weekend, you know, not great, you know, and then say the worst out of the top, you know, the top tier pack, should we say, then McLaren could be aiming for a P3, P4, maybe a P2 if Perez doesn't get his act together, and Mercedes could be down in like 8th, 9th place. Well, that point swing is bigger than you think, so it can really ebb and flow, and McLaren 100% are in the game. Mercedes-Benz and Ferrari, I'm going to do them together because they were kind of together, obviously, for the first part of the race. George Russell, starting on the soft compound tyres, did a mega stint on those soft tyres, by the way, and they were quick with the softs on Friday, so it was kind of to be expected in some regards, but the pace that he really showed was actually pretty incredible, so fair play to Russell on that one. The thing that really hurt Mercedes this weekend, which benefited Ferrari, was the straight line speed of the Mercedes-Benz. It's really not that good, and I don't know what it's to do with, whether it's setup related, whether it's the wing levels that they've got or something like that. The car's just not quick in a straight line, and the instability of the rear end was so key to see in this Grand Prix weekend, in particular, of course, being a high-speed circuit. It didn't allow Mercedes to really get on top of things, but what's promising for them is their new front wing that they bought actually also worked as well, because they were one of the fastest cars in the slow-speed corners. Now, granted, it's going to be down to setup windows. It's going to be down to what teams have actually configured for that race weekend. Because when we move to Hungary, a lot more teams are going to start setting their car up in that direction. But it might actually help Mercedes more than you think. We just don't know that. But there's a tweet, actually, of the Formula 1 on the F1 Twitter account. And it showed the battle between Alex Albon and Lewis Hamilton in the first lap of the British Grand Prix. I beg you, please go watch it, because it really makes the point clear that the Mercedes-Benz A has got an awful rear end, but if you look at the way that Albon, in terms of closing up via the slipstream on the first lap of the Grand Prix, he was exponentially fast. He was so quick and was all over Lewis Hamilton. And of course, yes, the Mercedes has got better cornering than the Williams, but in a straight line, Jesus, it was frightening to see it. And it was almost like if Albon did actually manage to find his way past Lewis Hamilton, Hamilton was done for the whole Grand Prix. He would have been stuck behind Albon for, well, until Albon pitted. There was no chance that Mercedes would have passed the Williams because it's so quick in a straight line. So that also benefited Ferrari, because we saw that Ferrari, apparently, they were over conservative of their tyres. They were looking after them way too much. Apparently, they said they lost like 15 seconds a lap time. And of course, this could easily be why the likes of McLaren have jumped up in performance, and maybe why some other teams have dropped back in performance. We've had the new construction of Pirelli tyres, which of course helps the front end of the cars probably a bit more than the rear end. So obviously those that suffer with front end issues benefit the likes of Ferrari and Aston. Those that suffer with the rear end instability like Mercedes don't really get that buffer and that boost, should we say. So the Ferraris were obviously quick in qualifying. They're obviously quick in a straight line as well. But Russell put in a mega stint on the soft tyres and had a great fight with Leclerc, easily able to stay in DRS. But similar to Hamilton, when he closed the gap back to Sainz, he was, again, stuck in DRS, but they just had to wait till the Ferraris pitted. George Russell was able to go onto the medium tyres. He got past Charles Leclerc eventually. With Lewis Hamilton, he set his strategy up to go onto the soft to wait for a safety car. Bish bash bosh, he got what he wanted and benefited to claim a podium place. if Mercedes-Benz can get their car right in qualifying, which is just their biggest weakness right now, they're absolutely fine. Like, I was watching the lap times, actually, in comparison on the medium tyres, when Hamilton was cleared from Carlos Sainz. Hamilton was actually lapping quicker than Verstappen, only by a tenth or so per lap. Now, granted, Verstappen could have easily been cruising, because at this point, he's about 8 or so seconds clear. But it still just goes to show that the Mercedes in race trim is a rapid car. But in qualifying trim, it's where it hurts them the most because, A, they struggle to overtake, apart from the Aston Martin, and like I said, I'll get to something in a second. Like I said, they struggle to overtake in a straight line, but also then, when it comes to them just being in that free air, they were quicker. And Hamilton was rapidly closing that gap to Norris. So, if you just imagine the two of them qualifying in front of the Ferraris and staying there, they would have been probably on the back of the McLarens the whole race. And it would have been an interesting battle, but we didn't get to see that because it panned out differently. Now, with Ferrari, it was a wretched weekend for them. I mean, they were quick in qualifying. Their race pace was absolutely nowhere. They didn't really have anything to offer. Neither Leclerc or Sainz really had great pace. Leclerc was getting detached straight away from the McLarens. He had more pace than Sainz, but again, the Ferrari strategy, it was going back to being useless again. We've had 2 decent strategy races from Ferrari, and it was almost like we were shocked by it, but we got a bit of dose of reality because the Ferraris, they pitted Leclerc on lap 18 for the hards, which made no sense at all. The hards suffered with horrible warm-up. It was a good race tyre, but it needed a couple of laps to warm up, and even then, Russell on old soft tyres, which apparently were only meant to do 10 laps, and Hamilton on his mediums, were much faster than the Ferrari of Charles Leclerc. Of course, the Mercedes pit stop, which was slow for Russell, meant that he couldn't pass him, but it still just showed that the Ferrari's pace was nowhere. And of course, after the safety car then, they got the strategy wrong with Sainz. They didn't pit him, I don't believe, or they may have pitted him for the hards. And then Leclerc, they actually pitted him then for the mediums to make sure that he had some sort of fresher tyre compound for the end. And it just basically stuffed them from there on in. And Aston Martin just had no pace whatsoever. And it's a bit worrying now for Aston Martin. Not too worrying, but since the Spanish Grand Prix, when was it? When did Alonso say that this was the last time we would not be on the podium? I think it was Spain. In Canada, bang, second place podium, probably matching Verstappen. You're thinking, all right, I see what he means. And then, of course, in Austria, in Silverstone, they were way off the pace. And in Silverstone, even more so, they were fighting the likes of Alpine. But I don't think Aston Martin fans should be worrying too much about that. I think the thing with Aston Martin is their car is not that good in high-speed circuits and high-speed corners. Canada was it's a high-speed circuit, but it's full of heavy braking zones and significant traction zones. Not long high-speed corners. They're all medium slow-speed corners, but it's just a power circuit. And that really does suit the Aston Martin a lot, the heavy braking, whereas here in Silverstone and Austria, it's just a couple of heavy braking zones, of course, but then a lot of high-speed corners, and the Aston suffers with it massively. So I expect it at the Hungaroring to maybe make an improvement. Williams, well, they made a massive improvement. I've already obviously mentioned them, like I said, with the Hamilton and the Albon thing, and with Williams and Logan Sargent in there. They were rapid, they were super, super quick, and their upgrades just continue to come, and they're getting better. I think the Hungaroring will give them a step back into the real world of it's going to be a bit difficult, but they're definitely making the charge in the right direction. For the rest of the teams, it's pretty much just sort of even Stevens, really. Alfa Romeo, AlphaTauri, Haas, they're just all in their little bubble. And Alpine's a little bit ahead of that bubble, depending on the type of race that they get in qualifying, really. Alpine's sort of in their little bubble in the middle, just here and there and everywhere. They're not making any strides forward, Alpine. I'd be worried about them. They've had a lot of upgrades come on that car, and they're not really doing anything with it. And I would expect them to maybe be doing a bit more. But we'll have to just wait and see if they can try and improve at the Hungaroring. But the rest of the pack are all just in their own little bubble. They're just there. Some teams good, some teams bad. Sometimes maybe good, sometimes maybe, Gustavo and his quotes. Heading into the Hungaroring, what do I expect from the weekend? I expect Red Bull to win because they're probably going to win every race this season, to be honest. I wouldn't put it past them. I expect the Mercedes to probably be a little bit more competitive. I could be wrong in this, by the way. But it's more not high-speed corners, more medium to slow-speed corners. They were quick in Silverstone with the slow speed, so I think it might suit them a little bit more. I could be wrong. I think Aston Martin will be back in the game because, again, high-speed corners significantly more downplay the strengths of their car compared to Mercedes from seeing the previous 2 races. McLaren and Ferrari, I don't know where they're going to be in all of it. I don't know really what I'm expecting. I think Ferrari will probably be at the back of the queue of the top 4 teams fighting for seconds in the championship. And I think McLaren may be in the middle, but I know that McLaren have got more upgrades coming to Hungary because they've got a 3-stage package coming. So maybe McLaren are actually genuine second fastest for the rest of the season. I don't know. I can't predict it anymore. It's just been like that. But that's kind of what I'm going with. I'm going to go with Red Bull, obviously, as the fastest. I think Mercedes, McLaren, Aston Martin will be super, super close, literally by a couple of tenths. I think the Ferraris will have the qualifying pace, because they always do. But I think their race pace will hurt them. And if anyone gets out-qualified by the Ferraris, I think it'll be painful for them. Although, you never know. They may have because obviously everyone's going to be running a lot more downforce on their cars. It might be that the DRS effectiveness helps them a little bit more in that circumstance. And then, of course, the rest of the pack is anyone's guess. And it's going to also be interesting to see Daniel Ricciardo on his first race weekend. I do think he'll out-qualify Tsunoda. I don't know if he'll out-qualify and out-race Tsunoda. I think because it is his first race weekend in that AlphaTauri. He's coming in completely cold. Of course, he'll have practice to work with, which is fine, but I think, really, if he does out-qualify and out-race Tsunoda, you could basically just get Tsunoda, pick him up, and then drop-kick him into a field goal because he'd be done for at that point if you get him beat straight away by a guy that's coming completely cold. That's kind of what I think. Let me know what you thought, though, of the British Grand Prix in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed the video, drop it a like, subscribe to the channel if you're new around here as well. And I will see you guys for my next video, which is very, very soon. So thank you very much for watching, and I'm out of here. Take care, all guys. Peace.